You got to put it down to a racing incident. Does this race mark the point where Piastri is edging ahead of Norris? First driver to score points for two teams in their first two Grand Prix. I feel like he didn't really have any business sticking his nose up there. Hello everybody, my name is Michael and welcome back to Last to First. This week we were at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku, and what an interesting and thrilling race it was. There were some great moves, some great drama, some great storylines throughout the grid, and let's get into things. Now, the race was a little bit dull, I think, for the first stint. However, as it went on, it just became more and more of an intriguing race. It was really throughout the end of it, after the first stint, you were really just on the edge of your seats seeing what was going to happen. The top three and eventually the top four were so close, and yeah, you just didn't know if something was going to, what was going to unfold. There's really nothing better than a battle for the win. That's when it really gets so much excitement with it all. As a quick summary, at the beginning, one of the key moves of the race was Perez jumping Sainz at the start, and that really set him up for the rest of the race and set the two of them on quite the trajectory by the end of things. Leclerc had a strong edge in the first stint. He had a 6-second advantage before they pitted, and as soon as the hards were put on Leclerc in the second stint, his edge really just faded. And then Piastri's brilliant move on Leclerc and his brilliant defense really won him the race. Now we have to start by talking about that Perez and Sainz crash. And wow, it was the second to last lap of the race. And it was absolute insanity seeing it on the live feed. I just could not even believe what just happened. But overall, I think you got to put it down to a racing incident. Looking at the offboards above it, it really just looked like both cars kind of drifted into each other a little bit. Maybe Sainz drifted a little more. You could see him compared to the white line of the street that he did drift a bit. But Perez also drifted over a little bit, and just a little bit of drifting from each of them made contact, and boom, into the walls. Overall, it was just really needless and unnecessary and just pure insanity. And I just jumped up in the air and started screaming. It was insane. But it just ruined a really great drive for Perez, and a pretty good job from Sainz as well. They were both on for good results for the Constructors' Championship and for both of their their confidence as of late, with Perez being in quite the slump and Sainz has been getting handedly beaten by Leclerc recently. It just would have been a good result for the both of them. So it was pretty needless, but created some absolutely crazy drama. It was really set up by Leclerc's tires falling off an absolute cliff. Like, all of a sudden, with a few laps to go, he just could not keep up with Piastri. He got out of the slipstream and got out of DRS range, and he was just barely able to keep it on the road. He was moving around, fishtailing a bit because he was losing the grip, and when that happened, he really went in the clutches of Perez and Sainz. Yeah, Sainz had a brilliant move on Perez when Leclerc was trying to defend from Perez. Sainz got an absolute great drive, went up the inside and passed Perez, and then he tried to go on the outside of, I believe it was turn 3 on Leclerc for some reason. I don't know why he tried to do that. I know he was much quicker than Leclerc, but that set him on the back foot because then he was offline. Next thing you know, Perez and Sainz are side by side, drift together, crash, and boom, that's all she wrote there. So interesting how really that crash happened a few turns before the actual incident, but absolute chaos. Somehow Baku always ends up throwing up some type of craziness in the race, whether it's F2, F1, always insanity. Now let's talk about how Piastri really won the race, and that really came down to his brilliant move on Leclerc. He just absolutely sent it, just like he did around the outside of Norris in Monza. He just full commitment, and just sent it to make the move, and that really set him up for the rest of the race to be able to win, especially because Ferrari was probably the slightly faster car today, but that move really set him up. He had great straight line speed, even outside of the DRS, and it was just an awesome move. just absolutely sensational. Had he not made that move, had Leclerc stayed ahead or gotten back ahead, I think Leclerc would have won that. But when you have track advantage, then that makes a big difference. Overall, I think Piastri just really made the difference today. I think we've been seeing that a lot lately with how close all the teams are, is that the drivers can really make the difference, which is really cool to see. Since I think McLaren was the second fastest car there today, I think had Piastri not had the drive of his life, then maybe he would not have won that race. An interesting question that I pose and that I'm starting to buy into more and more now is this the point? Does this race mark the point where Piastri is edging ahead of Norris? He's been slowly making advances, slowly doing better than Norris as of late. And then Monza really showed that he's not afraid of Norris, and he put the moves on him there. And this weekend, even though Norris was supposed to be the one back for the championship, Norris was nowhere, had a terrible qualifying, and Piastri is the one winning the race, making the crazy moves, and just showing how good he is. I mean, everybody knew how good he is, but I think he's starting to really advance his place. And this inter-team battle is going to be really interesting. Norris needs to come back and respond in a big way, because Piastri is starting to make his mark on that team. Somehow, despite Norris qualifying 17th and eventually going up to, I believe it was 15th, where he actually started after a couple pit lane starts, he still managed to finish ahead of Verstappen, which is really insane, and it is impressive. I think he did have a good race, but it is one of those scenarios of what if for Norris. Had he just done a better qualifying, he could have taken way more points out of Verstappen than he did. Just once again should have been a lot more. It's not every day that Verstappen has such a challenging race, and that they are so far off the pace. It has been 2 in a row now for Red Bull, or at least for Verstappen. But you can't assume that to continue. So Norris really needs to be taking off more points, taking advantage of these scenarios if he has any hope of doing anything for the Drivers' Championship. But nonetheless, Norris still had a good race. Him and Albon went super long on the hard tires for the first stint. They were 30-some laps into the race on those tires, and the tires just held up really well, and then they were able to fight back for some solid points on the medium tires at the end. So good drives from both of them. And I need to give a big shout out to a couple of the rookies. I mean, just some awesome storylines for the two of them. Colapinto had an outstanding weekend. He was thereabouts with Albon. Albon did get him in the end, but he is still absolutely doing awesome. And then Behrman too, scoring a point. How incredible for both the rookies there to score points like that. Only in Baku could we see something crazy like this. I thought it was a really interesting and funny record that Behrman has as being the first driver to score points for two teams in their first 2 Grand Prix. Thought that's pretty funny and interesting. He had a great race. He lucked into the points a little bit because of Sainz and Perez, but he was still there, and he still finished ahead of Hülkenberg. Colapinto, going back to him, I think he's really showing that getting rid of Sargent was the right move. I mean, he is already performing much better than, I would say, Sargent and Latifi combined, which is crazy in a second race. It'll be interesting to see where he goes from here, but I was super impressed with both Williams drivers, just the Williams as a whole. They're looking really strong with these upgrades, but Colapinto in particular, and then Behrman as well. Some really, really great storylines, some really great drives from the two of them. Now, as per usual, some things could change post-race. Feels like that always happens with FIA and with Formula One. But currently, Verstappen is under investigation for passing cars under the VSC. It was after the checkered flag, though. At the time of recording, nothing has been decided yet. I can't imagine anything will happen because it was after the checkered flag. I don't know why that would be too much of a problem. Some cars were going extremely slow, so I don't know why he wouldn't be able to pass them, even though there was the VSC out. So we'll see. If he does get some type of penalty for that, then maybe Norris will walk away with a few extra points. I can't imagine that happening, but at time of recording, not sure what's happening with that yet. Now, post-race, some videos have come out about some more flexi wing drama with the McLaren, which is really interesting. It seems that their rear wing, now not just their front wing, seems to be really flexing under load there on the big straight. So that's going to be an interesting thing to keep following. I mean, the FIA has already stated that everything is legal with the flexi wing stuff, but I would imagine some stuff is going to change a little bit next year, and I'm sure the other teams are really going to be on watch to see how they can implement a similar strategy, because you do gain a lot of time by having the flexible wings. So I'm interested to see how that continues on for the rest of the season. And I can imagine some other teams will try to adopt that. All right, so let's get into my wonderful predictions versus the actual results of the weekend. And Norris really threw my predictions out the window with his qualifying position on Saturday. So that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So with qualifying, I had Leclerc in P1 for my prediction, and that was correct. 4 in a row for Leclerc, pole position at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, which is really awesome. P2, I had Piastri, and he also qualified P2, so that's pretty sweet. Now was where things started going not so good. Norris, I predicted he'd be P3, and he was actually P17 before some of the other pit lane starts and stuff like that. So really horrendous qualifying from him. And to be fair, I don't think many people would have expected Norris to qualify that poorly and be knocked out of Q1. P4, I had predicted Verstappen. He actually wound up P6. Definitely didn't look very comfortable at all throughout qualifying or the race, and was really on the back foot once again. It does look like Red Bull is a bit better again. However, they still are behind McLaren and Ferrari. P5, I predicted that Sainz would be there, and he actually wound up P3. So he had a surprisingly good qualifying, despite him saying that this track really isn't his best track. Now for the race, P1, I had Leclerc winning it, and he so nearly did, but alas, he came home P2. For my prediction for P2, I had Verstappen, because I thought the two McLarens would collide and cause mayhem. However, of course, that did not happen. Verstappen wound up P5. Sainz, I had P3 for my prediction, and that was definitely very possible until he collided with Perez. So he did not finish. He had a nice DNF. P4, I had Hamilton, and I think that could have been a real possibility had he not ended up starting from the pit lane, so that was unfortunate. He wound up P9, kind of lucky to score a couple points there, but he had a pretty atrocious race, to be honest. P5, I predicted Russell, and he wound up P3 because of the Perez and Sainz incident. So he actually would have been in P5 had things stayed the same. So I would have been correct on that had there not been a crazy collision. For my bold prediction, I had thought there would be a McLaren collision. Of course, that did not happen. Norris had no shot of kind of going back at Piastri from his outing in Monza like I thought that would happen, since he didn't qualify anywhere near Piastri. So that's a loss on the bold prediction for me. For my masterclass of the weekend, I'll definitely give myself a thumbs up for that one. I thought Behrman would have a great weekend, and he did luck into the points a little bit, but he was thereabouts all race. He finished ahead of Hülkenberg, and I think he just continues to impress. I think everybody's excited to see him full-time at Haas next year. For the disaster class, I had Aston Martin, and I feel like it was partially correct. They really are firmly the fifth fastest team, kind of in a little no man's land right now. Alonso had a decent race, scoring some points, but Stroll had a disaster of a race. He took out Tsunoda at the beginning of the race. Poor old Tsunoda can't seem to finish a race right now. I feel the move was a bit of a deep lunge, and probably shouldn't have been attempted by Stroll. I feel like he didn't really have any business sticking his nose up there, but he wasn't completely out of the range. I could see why he'd make the move. Maybe Tsunoda could have left a little more room, but I think overall it was probably a little too risky on Stroll's behalf. and that caused him to pick up a puncture, and his race was kind of done from there. Then he retired early. I think he had some brake issues, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely not a good weekend for Stroll, but a decent weekend for Alonso on the other side of the garage. So let's get into a new segment that I'm starting here with some surprises and disappointments of the weekend of the race. First off, big surprise, I've got to go with Colapinto. I know he was looking good in qualifying and looked good at Monza last time out, but I think he had a really, really outstanding and surprisingly good race today. I think he's really starting to live up to the hype that he was starting to build a bit after Monza and after the qualifying in Baku. He's really impressing so far. I mean, it does help that he is coming to the team when they just got their upgrades, but I mean, for him to be this close to Albon in just his second outing and already challenging him is really impressive stuff. And yeah, it's just showing that it really was the right move to put him in the car over Sargent, and I think everybody's really excited to see what Colapinto can do from here. It is quite the shame that he won't have a drive next year, but maybe he'll land somewhere in 2026. It's just kind of hard to believe that he's driving this year and then he has no shot of staying with the team for the next year, since they already signed Sainz. So a little weird and unfortunate for Colapinto, but I'm sure he'll wind up somewhere in 2026 with the way that he's driving. Now, another surprise for me was Sergio Perez. I know he typically does do well here, but I think he really outclassed Verstappen, apart from the crash, of course. He outqualified him for the first time since Miami of 2023, which is pretty bonkers. But overall, he just looked really strong, and he was there with the top two the entire race with Leclerc and Piastri. So I was super impressed with Perez. It was looking like he was finally going to help in the constructors and score some solid points. And then he ended up making it even worse by crashing with Sainz. But yeah, I figured with how poor he's been performing and with the performance of the car being so bad as of late that he wouldn't do much, even though it is probably his best track. I thought he still would struggle, and I figured that Verstappen would definitely outclass him and outpace him this weekend, but no, he really pleasantly surprised me. Will he be able to build upon this come Singapore and the rest of the season, if he is granted the rest of the season? I'm not so certain, but it was finally a really good outing for Perez overall. I feel like Piastri also deserves a shout in this as a really pleasant surprise. I mean, we know how good Piastri is, but I think he's just continuing to show absolute greatness. For him to put that move on Leclerc and then just be absolutely ice cold, just steady, sturdy, didn't make a single mistake when he was defending from Leclerc for so long. It was just super, super impressive. And like I said, I knew he was good before, but he's only continuing to impress me. And his stock is quickly rising, and in my eyes, especially compared to Norris. And Norris is starting to I'm starting to be a little disappointed with Norris as of late, and I'm starting to feel a little bit of the tides turning between them two. So that's always been an interesting storyline between those two drivers, but it looks like it's just starting to heat up between the two of them. So I'm excited to see where they go from here. Now, for a big disappointment, I've got to go with Lewis Hamilton. He did have a pit lane start, which of course is tough, but overall, I feel like he just really had a poor weekend. He never felt comfortable in the car. Really disappointing qualifying. I think he could have done a bit better. And then even in the race where he normally where has been a strong suit this year, I feel like it was a tough race. He just really wasn't able to make any inroads on a lot of the drivers around him, and really he had no business scoring points, but he lucked into it with two drivers crashing out, so he was a bit lucky there. But overall, just looking not very comfortable. I'm sure at this point he's ready for a fresh start at Ferrari, and it's probably good for him to see Ferrari kind of back on the upward ascent after they were kind of down and out for a little while. I'm sure he'll be looking forward to getting in that car next year. Now, the championship standings got quite interesting after this race. Starting off with the constructors, of course, McLaren is now officially in the lead of the Constructors Championship for the first time since 2014, which I thought was really interesting because of the Mercedes dominance in 2014. I can't remember exactly what happened. It was they led in Australia, so I think Mercedes at the time must have had some DNFs or something for McLaren to briefly lead the championship that year. But nonetheless, it's been a whole decade, and they're finally back on top, and with a decent little margin of 20 points after Perez had that incident. It quickly swung in the direction of McLaren, so they're at 476, Red Bull 456. And then Ferrari is kind of knocking on the door. They're thereabouts at 425, with them being back in the hunt seemingly. It will be interesting to see if they can catch Red Bull, and then who knows what will happen between with McLaren and them as well. But had Perez and Sainz not crashed, that would have definitely affected things. Those were some really valuable points for the two teams that both of them needed. But yeah, finally, McLaren has surpassed Red Bull, and much earlier in the season than maybe we were thinking earlier in the year, which is pretty crazy. For the Drivers' Championship, I mean, still, Norris did make some inroads into Verstappen's lead, but he still has 59 points behind. You know, it's only getting more and more challenging, more and more of a long shot, especially when Norris is not maximizing the weekend. I mean, at this rate, like, Leclerc is not too far behind Norris. Like, is Leclerc still in the championship picture? Like, I don't know. I think it's getting a little funny at this point. It was already going to take a miracle and a half for Norris to catch Verstappen, but when Norris continues to not maximize the weekends where Verstappen is behind and where he's not gaining a lot of points on him, then, I mean, how can we expect a true title fight? It's pretty ironic that on the weekend where McLaren is like, we'll back Norris for the championship, he has a really poor weekend, and Piastri completely outshines and outclasses him. Pretty ironic. So 59 points behind, bit of a tough sell with, 7 or 6 races to go? Not a lot. It'll take some absolute craziness for Norris to catch up to Verstappen. Lastly, another news section for the podcast. Wanted to go over an overtake of the day, and that has got to be Piastri on Leclerc. I know I've talked about this a bunch, but it was just really awesome. Of course, it was a great overtake by itself. He was super committed, and it was a massive lunge. Really caught Leclerc off guard. He just looked so comfortable on the brakes the entire race. Piastri just was always gaining time in the braking zone in turn 1 there, and just was always able to outbrake Leclerc, and that really made the difference. The commentators and F1 TV mentioned it, and it really makes sense that Piastri really looked like Ricciardo of the old, with how he was able to get on the brakes so deep and so late, and it was really impressive, and you know, it was awesome. Cool to see some really hard, impressive, cutthroat moves from Piastri between last time out in Monza and this time. It was really cool to see. And for a special shout out for the overtake of the day, I think it went under the radar a little bit, but we did briefly see a Gasly going around the outside of Russell and Ricciardo into turn 1. I thought it was really impressive. He looked super committed, and it was decisive, and just made it happen. I didn't think he was going to slow that car down at all. I thought he was going to go into the runoff or into the wall. But yeah, he just slowed it down perfectly, super late on the brakes, around the outside, and off he went. I mean, of course, in the end, it didn't matter much, but I still think it deserved a shout out because it was really impressive and a really cool move. All right, so that's my race rundown for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. It was an awesome, thrilling race with so many good things to talk about. Let me know what you all thought about the race in the comments down below. I'm so happy that we get a back-to-back weekend before another long break. Next time out, we're in Singapore. And if it's anything like last year, it should be an interesting one that might throw up some wrenches into our ideas of what we think will happen. So give me a follow on social media if you're interested. I'm on X as Last to First Reel. First spelling F1RST, Instagram Last to First, and also I'm on all the podcast mediums like Apple, Spotify, Google. You can find the video podcast on YouTube as well. Also, I started a blog. That's lastthefirst.wordpress.com. Once again, first spelled F1RST. So I appreciate you all tuning in for my race rundown of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. We look ahead towards Singapore, and I'll see you all in the next one.